About 3 years ago, I was visiting an old family friend named Charlie. He had purchased a very large piece of property over in the US. While I was there, he asked me to help him in the forested areas so he could set up a couple of tree stands. Charlie was a truly gifted carpenter, but the years on him made it difficult at best for him to get everything set up. These tree stands may have been only the size of a standard build, but might as well be mini apartments considering what he did. Solar panels on the roof powered a small heater with a single burner so you could cook there if you wanted to. In a hidden area where you could relieve yourself, and there was retractable windows to keep the weather at bay. Given the size of his property, which butted up against the state land, or federal, I forget, it stood to reason why he wouldn't want to get out of your stand just to try and, get out of the weather for a bit. With all that being said, we loaded everything up on a few ATVs. Oh, I forgot to mention, it wasn't just us, but a bunch of friends had gotten together to help him. In truth, we were all invited to hunt on the land, and we were going to make sure everything was set up for when we arrived. Now, I need to mention that we were all packing heat, at one level or another. I had a pump-action shotgun 12 gauge, and of course my standard 45 on my belt. I didn't expect to see much, but when you're that deep in the forest, you never can tell. We were all put back when Charlie loaded up a Barrett 50 cal and a 500 Magnum on his hip. Saying this was overkill was an extreme understatement. When we asked him why he was carrying such heavy firearms, he just said, "Well, there's some big animals out there." We gave him a little crap about shooting snakes and such, and then we were off. We each had our assigned area, and we were split into two groups. It was pretty uneventful for most of the day, and we were in good place to get everything done within 2 days we had planned. We reached our last one for the day about late afternoon, already discussing what we should continue or get another one set up before night comes, and we found ourselves realizing that Charlie had planned this one to be on the last day. The location was basically a mesa that the ATVs actually couldn't even climb, so everything had to be taken up piece by piece, reassembled and raised up there. We thought this was insane until we got to the top. The trees were nothing but white oak around an apple thicket. A few birch trees on the outside too, but basically it was deer food heaven. Realizing this gave us a new interest in getting this rather large stand set up. After about an hour, Charlie and another friend, David, were going to get the last load of materials from the first ATV, while me and my buddy of Charlie's, Henry, I think his name was, worked on the stand. As I finished with one of the bolts, I reached down expecting Henry to hand me another. I looked down and his eyes were fixed on something in the woodline. I spun around to see what he was looking at, to see something I really did not expect to see. There was a naked young woman, about maybe 35 meters from us. Being former military, this is how we judge distance, even in the US. But, she was just standing there, staring as though she couldn't figure out who we were. Harry and I started for a moment and just stared, and then just whispering to each other about if we could both see her, if we were delusional, and what the hell she was doing this far out in the woods. As we did, she seemed to creep just a little closer to us. I spoke to her. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. Henry said, "It's all right, ma'am," in his light accent, of course. She continued to creep towards us as we slowly walked up to her. She stepped from behind a tree, and that's when we noticed. With nothing between her and us, we could see that there was something very wrong with her legs. They were bent at the bottom like that of horses and ended in deer-like hooves. Henry and I froze right in our tracks, and our sudden stop must have made her stop as well. With that, we were still confused with the look on her face. I softly said, "What the fuck is that?" As I stared at her, Henry said, I don't know. Could she be some sort of inbred? I thought for a moment before responding. If she is, then why is only her feet messed up? We were both silent for a few moments until a look of sheer panic came across her face. It didn't take us but a moment to realize that she was looking behind us. Henry and I spun around, and standing about 10 meters away was something horrific. It stood on two legs and was covered with dark fur like a deer. It was muscular, and the body structure was much more similar to humans than that of a deer. Its hooved feet seemed to almost dig into the ground under the pressure of this 8 to 9 foot tall structure. That wasn't even counting the antlers on its head. Before you ask, no, it wasn't a rotting skull or anything like that, though I will say that the head was a bit distorted compared to what you think a normal deer would look like. As far as hands go, well, I didn't get a good look. After only a second of looking at us, the damn thing let out a wail that damn near made me piss myself. Though that scream did not last long, as Henry and I both drew our pistols and began to fire. Contrary to popular belief, this thing didn't just stand there and take it. Though the rounds were not strong enough to penetrate its hide, each impact was sending shockwaves through its body as it hit. Think of the suit from that John Wick movie, and you get the basic idea. And it must have hurt because that thing dropped to one knee, still kind of screaming, but not quite anymore. We both emptied our magazines and reloaded as this thing got back on its feet and screamed again. This time, it wasted no time in charging at both of us. I was lucky that it chose to go after Henry instead of me. I got the next magazine as it drove its antlers into H's shoulder, picking him up off the ground. I didn't know if it was fear or desperation, but I began to unload into its back. I must have hit its spine because I saw its legs give out and it fell over, knocking Henry free in the process. As this thing began to back up, Henry rolled away and ran towards his pistol. I dropped my mag and loaded the last one as I saw it raise its head and look at the girl thing. It then turned towards me and snorted. This was the time I could see the true malice in its eyes as it turned to face me. It got low as though it was ready to charge. I raised my pistol and I was able to get one shot before having to try and dodge this rampaging creature. I say try because it caught my abdomen with the rock and it seemingly kicked up right before charging. I stumbled back as it came for me. Suddenly, I hear a bunch of shots ring out. Henry had found his pistol and began to blast this thing. It seemed to hold up its arm in order to shield itself from the incoming fire as it pressed down towards me. I continued to fire as I could, though I doubt I hit anything, until I was out of ammo. Dropping my pistol, I immediately drew my knife, the solid full-tang K-bar, and drove it as hard as I could into this thing. Surprisingly, it penetrated the hide and made this thing yelp. Instantly, I felt pain too as this thing backhanded my torso with enough force to send me flying. My bad leg hit a tree as I went tumbling to the ground in severe pain. Maybe it heard me in pain, or maybe I had pissed it off that much, but whatever the case, this thing came to finish me off. As I looked up at this thing walking over to me, all I could think was, well, I'm fucked. Then an unmistakable sound burst through the air and this thing ended up falling to its side. Charlie had heard the shots and had grabbed his Barrett, putting one of the rounds into this thing. It must have been a grazing wound because this thing rolled over, got up, and took off into the woods at a speed I didn't even think was possible. I could hear Dave calling for me and Henry to see if we were still alive. I could hear Henry responding, but I was having some trouble getting air back in my lungs after being hit in the torso. Though it didn't take long before they found me on the ground, and after getting me on my feet, we all went to and nearly completed stand and made sure everyone was in one piece. I remember Charlie saying, "I told you there are some big animals in these woods." As they looked me over, I saw movement just outside the edge of the mesa area. It wasn't the only one I could see either. I wasn't just seeing it, as we could hear heavy steps as it circled us. Once I was able to stand, we decided we should make our own way down. As we got ready to go, we all received one hell of a shock. Just to my right was 5 of those naked female things. Not all of them looked as human as the first one. A couple of them had tails that stuck up and swung just like a standard white-tailed deer. One had a head that was more deer-ish, that included long ears that seemed to move independently. Oddly enough, her legs looked totally human. Charlie pulled his revolver, and Henry was able to stop him before he fired. There was a mix of words, of course, as Charlie wanted to drop the females, and yet Henry was adamant that they did not attack us. It was something else. It wasn't until we could hear a very loud deer grunt that got our attention, was once again facing outward. Henry grabbed the Barrett while Charlie and Dave each had their pistols out. I felt almost naked without a firearm at my disposal. Then again, in my condition, I doubt I could have held one correctly. The females seemed to try an inch closer to us until Charlie turned his pistol in their direction. As small as they were, that hand cannon he was carrying would probably split them right down the middle. That was when that big bastard charged again. This time, it threw a very large branch our way right before it charged. The branch missed, but Charlie didn't. Now, I know a .45 caliber didn't hurt the thing, but that 500 mag must have been painful to the point of collapse. He only got 2 shots off, but it was enough. The creature dropped down below the edge where we could hear it running through the woods, kind of like an elk would run through the forest. I could still hear the scream from it as it ran off in pain. Oddly enough, the females barely moved during the entire ordeal. For a moment, we couldn't figure out why they didn't just run away when the shooting started. It wasn't until Dave pointed out that there was a distinct aroma in the air. We all took a deep breath and rolled our eyes. "You've got to be fucking kidding me," he said. I quickly asked, "What?" He responded, "Them damn things are in heat." Suddenly, the actions of that big bastard made perfect sense. It wasn't trying to kill us, but just scare us off in a display of dominance to impress the females. If I wasn't in so much pain, I would have laughed. Finally, Charlie said, "Fuck this," and fired a round in the tree next to those 3 females. The resulting explosion of wood was enough to send them all scurrying away. We all made it back down to the ATVs and made it back to the house later. But yes, we did end up going back and finishing the stands. I mean, it was a good place to spot for deer during hunting season after all, though I'm never going up there again without some really heavy weapons. After all, there's some big animals out in those woods.